Chapter 1. The Death of a King and the Curse of the Tower. The night was black as pitch, the air heavy with the damp chill of London's ancient stones. In the heart of the Tower of London, a fortress that had stood for centuries as both palace and prison, a scream pierced the silence. It was not the cry of a man, nor the wail of a woman, but the high, desperate plea of a child, abruptly stifled as though a hand had clamped over a trembling mouth. The sound echoed briefly through the stone corridors, then vanished, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The great iron door of the chamber slammed shut with a clang that reverberated like a death knell. The tower, that looming monument of power and dread, held its breath. Two young boys, Edward V, aged 12, and his brother Richard of York, just 9, were locked within. By morning, their chamber would be empty. Who had taken them? Who had silenced their cries? And what unspeakable treachery had unfolded in the shadow of England's crown? This was the summer of 1483, a year that would etch itself into history as one of the darkest chapters of the English monarchy. The mystery of the princes in the Tower, as they would come to be known, remains one of the most haunting enigmas of the ages, a tale woven with ambition, betrayal, and the chilling specter of murder. To understand the horror of their disappearance, we must first step back into the turbulent world that birthed it, a world of warring houses, fractured loyalties, and a throne stained with blood. The Wars of the Roses, a kingdom divided. England in the late 15th century was a land torn apart by civil war, a brutal struggle known as the Wars of the Roses. Two rival branches of the royal Plantagenet family, the House of York and the House of Lancaster, vied for the throne. Their emblems of white and red roses became symbols of a conflict that drenched the realm in blood. For 30 decades, battles raged, nobles fell, and the crown passed from hand to hand like a cursed relic. By 1483, the House of York held the upper hand, but victory was fragile and trust was a luxury few could afford. King Edward IV, a towering figure of the Yorkist cause, had ruled since 1661, his reign a precarious balance of strength and diplomacy. A warrior king with a commanding presence, Edward had clawed his way to the throne through battlefield triumphs and political cunning. His marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a beautiful but low-born widow, had shocked the nobility, sowing seeds of discord among his allies. The Woodvilles, Elizabeth's ambitious family, rose to prominence, earning the resentment of older noble houses who saw them as upstarts. Yet Edward's charisma and military prowess held the kingdom together until fate intervened. In April 1483, Edward IV fell ill. At just 40 years old, the robust king withered under a mysterious ailment, his strength sapped, as whispers of poison circulated among the court. On April 9th, he breathed his last and left the throne to his eldest son, Edward V, a boy of 12, whose reign was destined to be one of the shortest and most tragic in English history. The king's death sent shockwaves through the realm. The House of York, already fractured by internal rivalries, faced a new crisis. A child king, vulnerable and untested, with enemies circling like wolves. The Protector and the Princes. Edward IV's will named his younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector of the realm until young Edward V came of age. Richard was a complex figure, a man whose loyalty to his brother had never wavered. At 30 years old, he was a seasoned commander, known for his courage in battle and his fierce devotion to the Yorkist cause. Yet he was also a man of contradictions, pious yet ruthless, loyal yet ambitious. His physical appearance, marked by a slight deformity of the spine, later exaggerated by his enemies, set him apart in a court obsessed with perfection. To some, he was a steadfast guardian. To others, a brooding opportunist biding his time. The two young boys, Edward V and his younger brother Richard of York, were the heart of the Yorkist succession. Edward, the elder, was a bright golden-haired boy, raised to rule with the confidence of his father. His brother, Richard, was quieter, with a delicate frame and a thoughtful demeanor that endeared him to those who knew him. The boys were close, their bond forged in the sheltered world of their mother's household at Ludlow Castle, far from the intrigues of London. But with their father's death, that world crumbled. The princes were summoned to the capital to prepare for Edward's coronation, a ceremony meant to solidify the Yorkist hold on the throne. Their journey to London was fraught with tension. Elizabeth Woodville, now the Queen Dowager, mistrusted Richard of Gloucester. The Woodvilles had long clashed with Richard, viewing him as a threat to their influence over the young king. As Edward V traveled from Ludlow, escorted by her mother's kin, Richard intercepted the royal party at Stony Stratford. In a swift and bloodless coup, he arrested the Woodville escorts, including the Queen's brother Anthony Woodville, and seized control of the young king. He claimed he was protecting Edward from the Woodville's ambition, but to Elizabeth it was a betrayal. She fled to sanctuary at Westminster Abbey with her younger son Richard and her daughters, fearing for their lives.
The Tower of London, palace or prison? By late spring, both princes were lodged in the Tower of London, a sprawling fortress on the banks of the Thames. To the modern mind, the tower evokes images of dungeons and executions, but in 1483 it was also a royal residence, a place where kings prepared for their coronations. The princes were housed in the Garden Tower, later known as the Bloody Tower, their chambers furnished with the trappings of royalty. Servants attended them, and for a time they were seen playing in the tower's courtyards, their laughter a fleeting echo of innocence in the place steeped in dread. Yet the tower was no ordinary palace. Its walls had witnessed treachery and death for centuries. Kings had been crowned within its gates, but others had met their end there, their blood soaking the stones. The prince's presence in the tower, initially presented as a matter of protocol, began to feel ominous. Whispers spread through the court. Why were the boys confined? Why were their attendants replaced with men loyal to Richard? And why was the coronation of Edward V repeatedly delayed? Richard, now firmly in control as Lord Protector, moved swiftly to consolidate his power. He summoned a council of nobles and declared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, citing a supposed pre-contract with another woman. If true, this rendered the princes illegitimate, stripping Edward V of his claim to the throne. The accusation was convenient. Too convenient, some whispered. On June 25, 1483, a hastily assembled parliament declared Richard the rightful king. He was crowned Richard III on July 6th, in a ceremony marked with pomp but shadowed by unease. The curse of the Tower. The disappearance of the princes cast a pall over Richard's reign. In the streets of London, commoners spoke of a curse upon the House of York, a divine retribution for the blood spilled in their quest for power. The tower itself seemed to pulse with menace, its ancient stones whispering of secrets too terrible to unearth. Stories circulated of ghostly figures seen in the Garden Tower. Two boys, hand in hand, their faces pale and sorrowful. Whether these were mere rumors or something more, they fed the growing sense that Richard's crown was tainted. Richard himself remained silent on the matter. He neither confirmed nor denied the prince's fate, a decision that only deepened the suspicion against him. His allies urged him to produce the boys, to prove they were alive, but he offered no explanation. Instead, he tightened his grip on the realm, executing those who dared question his legitimacy. Yet the specter of the princes haunted him, their absence a wound that festered in the heart of his rule. A kingdom on the brink. As the summer of 1483 gave way to autumn, England teetered on the edge of chaos. The Wars of the Roses, thought to be nearing their end, flared anew. Across the Channel, Henry Tudor, a distant claimant to the throne through the House of Lancaster, began to rally support. He promised to overthrow Richard and restore justice, using the mystery of the princes as a rallying cry. In the shadows, other figures, disgraced Yorkists, embittered Woodvilles, and opportunistic nobles, plotted their own schemes, each hoping to turn the crisis to their advantage. The stage was set for a drama that would shake the foundations of the monarchy. The disappearance of the princes was not merely a tragedy, but a catalyst, exposing the rot at the heart of England's nobility. Who had silenced the cries of the boys? Was it Richard, driven by ambition to secure his throne? Or were there other hands at work, weaving a web of lies to destroy him? As the nation held its breath, the Tower of London stood as a silent witness, its walls guarding a secret that would echo through the centuries. The story of the princes in the Tower had only begun, and with each passing day, new horrors would come to light. The truth, if it could ever be found, lay buried in a labyrinth of betrayal, where every answer led to another question, and every revelation carried the weight of a curse.
Chapter 2: The Web of Deceit. The summer of 1483 clung to London like a fever, its heat amplifying the stench of betrayal that permeated the royal court. The Tower of London, that ancient fortress of stone and secrets, stood as a silent witness to the vanishing of two young princes, Edward V, aged 12, and his brother Richard of York, just 9. Their absence was a wound that festered, poisoning the air with suspicion and fear. King Richard III, newly crowned, wore his crown like a man awaiting the executioner's axe, his every gesture watched by eyes that concealed daggers. The mystery of the princes had become more than a question of their fate. It was a weapon, wielded by those who sought to shatter the House of York or climb its ruins to power. In this treacherous game, truth was a phantom, and deceit was the only currency that mattered. The fragile throne. Richard's coronation on July 6, 1483, should have been a moment of triumph, a seal on the Yorkist victory in the Wars of the Roses. The streets of London bloomed with white roses, the emblem of York, and the great hall of Westminster rang with oaths of fealty. Nobles in silks and furs bowed before their new king, their voices proclaiming loyalty while their hearts harbored doubt. Richard, clad in crimson and gold, bore the weight of the crown with a steely resolve, but the absence of his nephews cast a shadow over the festivities. The princes, once the hope of the Yorkist line, were nowhere to be seen, their fate a question no one dared ask aloud. The court was a viper's nest, each lord and lady a potential traitor. Richard moved swiftly to secure his rule, rewarding his allies with titles and lands while punishing those who wavered. The Woodvilles, the family of the late Queen Elizabeth, were his first targets. Stripped of power after Richard's coup at Stony Stratford, they were branded as enemies of the crown. Anthony Woodville, the Queen's brother and former guardian of Edward V, was imprisoned in a northern castle, his fate a grim warning to others. Elizabeth herself remained in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, her defiance a constant irritant to Richard's authority. Yet even as he crushed his foes, the whispers grew louder. What has become of the princes? The nobles who had supported Richard's rise were not immune to doubt. The Duke of Buckingham, a powerful Yorkist and Richard's right hand, stood by his side. But his ambition was a poorly kept secret. His smiles were too wide, his words too carefully chosen. Other lords, like John Howard, the newly minted Duke of Norfolk, and the ever-cautious Lord Stanley, watched from the sidelines, their loyalties as fluid as the Thames. Beyond the court, the people of London grew restless, their faith in the monarchy shaken by tales of missing princes and a king who ruled through fear.
The House of York, once a beacon of strength, was fracturing under the weight of its own secrets. The illegitimacy gambit. Richard's claim to the throne rested on an audacious lie that his brother Edward VIII's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid. The story, carefully orchestrated by Richard's allies, centered on a supposed pre-contract of marriage between Edward and a woman named Eleanor Butler, made before his union with Elizabeth. If true, this would render Edward's children, including the princes, illegitimate, clearing the path for Richard to seize the crown. The claim was presented to a hastily assembled council in June 1883, with Robert Stillington, Bishop of Bath and Wells, as its chief architect. Stillington, a cunning cleric with a hunger for favor, swore he had witnessed Edward's earlier betrothal, though he offered no evidence beyond his word. The accusation was a masterstroke of political maneuvering, but it was also a gamble. Stillington's sudden revelation raised suspicions. He had served Edward IV for years without mentioning this pre-contract, and his loyalty to Richard was too convenient. Some whispered that the bishop had been coerced, his testimony a fabrication to justify Richard's usurpation. Others wondered if there was truth to the claim, for Edward IV's reputation as a philanderer was well known, and a secret betrothal was not beyond him. On June 25th, Parliament accepted the story, declaring Richard the rightful king. The princes were cast aside, their claim to the throne nullified. But the lie was a dual-edged sword. By branding the princes illegitimate, Richard had made them both irrelevant and dangerous. If they were alive, they could inspire rebellion. If dead, their blood would stain his hands forever. His refusal to address their fate only deepened the suspicion. Had he hidden them in some remote stronghold? Or had he taken a darker path that one no king could admit?
A king's inner conflict. Richard III was a man of contradictions, torn between loyalty and ambition. To his supporters, he was a warrior who had fought tirelessly for his brother's cause, a pious man who endowed churches and spoke of justice. His slight frame and curved spine, later exaggerated by his enemies, marked him as an outsider in a court obsessed with perfection. Yet there was a ruthlessness to him, a cold pragmatism that unnerved even his allies. His seizure of the throne had been swift and calculated, revealing a mind that saw power as a necessity, not a privilege. In the quiet of his chambers, away from the court's prying eyes, Richard wrestled with his choices. He had sworn to protect his nephews, the sons of the brother he had loved. Their faces, Edward's bright confidence, Richard's quiet vulnerability, haunted him, a reminder of the legacy he had both inherited and betrayed. Did he see them as threats to be eliminated or as burdens to be borne? The truth was locked within his heart, guarded as fiercely as the tower's gates. His silence on the matter was a shield, but it was also a chain, binding him to the growing suspicion that he was a murderer. The court mirrored Richard's turmoil. Nobles whispered of secret councils in darkened halls, where plots were hatched to either bolster or destroy the king. Servants, fearful of their master's wrath, carried messages they dared not read. One such message, intercepted by a loyalist, hinted at a Woodville plot to rescue the princes from the tower. The note spoke of a midnight escape, a boat waiting at the river's edge, but it was vague, its author unknown. Richard's response was immediate. He doubled the tower's guard and replaced the prince's attendants with men whose loyalty was beyond question, or so he hoped. The shadow of Sir James Tyrrell. Among Richard's inner circle was Sir James Tyrrell, a knight of unwavering loyalty and chilling efficiency. Tyrell was a man of action, his face a mask of stoic resolve, his words few but weighty. He had served Richard through the bloodiest days of the Wars of the Roses, earning his trust with deeds rather than flattery. In the summer of 1483, as the prince's fate hung in the balance, Tyrell was seen entering the tower under cover of night, accompanied by two men cloaked in shadow. Servants whispered of heavy footsteps and muffled voices, but none dared approach. Weeks later, a chilling rumor surfaced, carried by a trembling stable boy who claimed to have overheard Tyrell in a tavern. The boy, barely 14, swore he had heard Tyrell speak of a grievous task ordered by the king, a task that would secure the realm for York. The boy's tale was fragmented, his fear palpable, and he vanished soon after, leaving only questions. Had Tyrell been tasked with killing the princes, or was his mission to smuggle them to safety, far from Richard's enemies? Tyrell's sudden absence from court only deepened the mystery. Some said he had fled to the continent, burdened with guilt. Others believed he had been silenced, his loyalty rewarded with death. The rumor reached Elizabeth Woodville in her sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. A smuggled letter, its ink smudged with haste, spoke of Tyrell's midnight visit to the tower and a heavy sack carried from its gates. Elizabeth's hands shook as she read, her mind torn between hope and horror. Were her sons dead, their bodies discarded like refuse? Or had they been hidden, protected by loyalists she could not name? The letter offered no answers, only pain. And Elizabeth's resolve hardened. She would uncover the truth, even if it meant tearing down the throne itself. A kingdom on the brink. By September 1483, Richard's reign was a house of cards, trembling in the wind. The disappearance of the princes had fractured the Yorkist cause, turning allies into enemies and sowing doubt among the faithful. Richard's attempts to quell the unrest through executions, bribes, and displays of power only deepened the divide. The court was a battleground of whispers and knives, where every noble was a potential traitor. Across the Channel, Henry Tudor, the Lancastrian claimant, gathered his forces, using the prince's fate as a rallying cry. In London shadows, conspirators plotted, their plans as fragile as the parchment they were written on. The stage was set for a reckoning, and the blood of the innocent would demand its price.
Chapter 3. The Ghosts of the Tower. The autumn of 1483 draped London in a shroud of mist, as if the city itself sought to conceal its secrets. The Tower of London, that ancient bastion of power and dread, loomed over the Thames, its stones whispering tales of treachery and loss. The disappearance of the two young princes, Edward V and Richard of York, had become more than a mystery. It was a curse, seeping into the hearts of nobles and commoners alike. King Richard III, his crown barely settled, ruled over a court fractured by fear and suspicion, where every shadow seemed to hide a traitor. The prince's absence was a wound that refused to heal, and as the days grew shorter, whispers of their fate grew darker. Stories of ghostly figures and muffled cries began to haunt the tower, feeding a growing sense that the boy's spirits lingered, demanding justice in a realm consumed by deceit. Whispers in the dark. The Tower of London had always been a place of secrets, its walls steeped in the blood of kings and prisoners. By late September 1483, it had become a symbol of dread, its name spoken in hushed tones even among the boldest nobles. The common folk of London, gathered in taverns and marketplaces, told tales of strange happenings within the fortress. Servants swore they heard the laughter of children echoing through the corridors at dusk, only to find the rooms empty. A guard, pale and trembling, claimed to have seen two small figures, hand in hand, standing at the edge of the garden tower in the moonlight, their faces obscured by shadow. When he approached, they vanished, leaving only the chill of fear in their wake. These stories, dismissed by some as superstition, took root in a city already gripped by unease.
The prince's disappearance had ignited a fire of rumor, each tale more chilling than the last. Some said the boys had been smothered in their sleep, their bodies hidden beneath the tower's ancient stones. Others whispered of a secret passage known only to a few, through which the princes had been smuggled to safety. The most haunting tales spoke of a curse, a divine retribution for the sins of the House of York, whose thirst for power had torn England apart. The tower, it seemed, was no longer just a fortress, it was a prison for the living and the dead, its ghosts a reminder of a crime that could not be buried. The court was not immune to these tales. Nobles, though loath to admit it, felt the weight of the tower's shadow. At a council meeting in October, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. A nervous lord muttered of the prince's spirits, and though his words were met with laughter, the unease lingered. Even Richard III, whose piety was well known, seemed troubled. He avoided the tower when possible, preferring the safety of Westminster, but its presence loomed over his reign like a specter. The king's silence on the prince's fate only fueled the rumors, turning whispers into accusations that threatened to unravel his rule. A discovery beneath the stones. The first tangible clue to the prince's fate came not in 1483, but nearly 2 centuries later, in 1674, when workmen repairing a staircase in the White Tower uncovered a grim secret. Beneath a pile of rubble, they found a wooden chest containing 2 small skeletons, their bones fragile and entwined as if in a final embrace. The discovery sent shockwaves through London, reviving the mystery of the princes with chilling clarity. The skeletons, judged to be those of children aged roughly 9 and 12, matched the ages of Edward V and Richard of York at the time of their disappearance. The court of Charles II, eager to close a chapter of history, declared the bones to be those of the princes, and they were interred in Westminster Abbey with solemn ceremony. Yet the discovery raised more questions than answers. How had the bodies come to be buried beneath the staircase? Who had placed them there, and when? Some pointed to Richard III, arguing that the hidden grave was proof of his guilt. Others questioned the timing, noting that the tower had been used by many rulers since 1483, including the Tudors, who had their own reasons to obscure the truth. The bones, though a haunting clue, were not examined with the rigor of modern science, and their identity remained uncertain. For the people of 1483, unaware of this future find, the prince's fate was a void filled only by fear and speculation. In the autumn of that year, a more immediate discovery shook the court. A servant named Thomas Green, tasked with cleaning the garden tower, stumbled upon a blood-stained cloth hidden behind a loose stone in the prince's former chamber. The cloth, tattered and stiff with age, bore the faint outline of a royal crest, suggesting it belonged to one of the boys. Green, a simple man with no love for intrigue, reported his find to his master, a minor official loyal to Richard. The news spread quickly, reaching the ears of the king's enemies before it could be suppressed. The cloth became a symbol of the prince's fate, proof to some that they had met a violent end. Richard ordered it destroyed, but its existence lingered in the minds of those who heard the tale, a grim reminder of the crime that haunted his reign.
The weight of suspicion. The court was a crucible of paranoia, each noble a potential conspirator. The Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's ally, grew increasingly distant, his ambition outweighing his loyalty. Rumors swirled that he was in contact with Elizabeth Woodville, plotting to restore the princes, or at least their legacy, to the throne. Lord Stanley, whose loyalty was as slippery as the Thames, maintained a careful neutrality, his eyes always on the horizon where Henry Tudor's forces gathered. Even the clergy, led by figures like the Bishop of Ely, whispered of rebellion, their sermons laced with veiled critiques of Richard's rule. The king's response was to tighten his grip. He stationed spies in every corner of the court, their reports painting a picture of a realm on the brink of collapse. One such report, delivered in a sealed letter to Richard's chamber, spoke of a plot to free the princes from the tower. The letter claimed that a group of Woodville loyalists, disguised as merchants, had bribed a guard to unlock a secret passage. The plan had failed, the letter said, but its existence was a warning. The princes, whether dead or alive, were a rallying point for rebellion. Richard's face darkened as he read the letter, his hands trembling with rage. He ordered the guard executed, but the truth of the plot remained elusive, another thread in the web of deceit. The common folk, too, felt the weight of the mystery. In London streets, ballads began to circulate, their verses mourning the lost princes and cursing the king who had failed them. One such song, sung in hushed tones in alehouses, spoke of 2 roses plucked before their bloom, their blood a stain upon the crown. The singers risked their lives, for Richard's spies were everywhere, but the songs persisted, a quiet rebellion against a king whose throne seemed built on sand. A voice from the shadows. Amid the whispers and rumors, a new figure emerged to deepen the mystery. An old man, claiming to be a former servant of the tower, came forward with a tale that chilled those who heard it. His name was William Collingbourne, a grizzled figure with eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. Collingbourne claimed to have worked in the tower during the summer of 1483, tending the fires in the prince's chamber. On the night of their disappearance, he said, he had seen a man cloaked in black, carrying 2 heavy sacks from the garden tower to a waiting boat on the Thames. The man's face was hidden, but his gait and bearing suggested a knight of high rank, perhaps Sir James Tyrrell, though Collingbourne would not say the name. The old man's story was fraught with gaps. He could not say what was in the sacks, nor where the boat had gone. His tale was dismissed by Richard's loyalists as the ravings of a drunkard, but it found fertile ground among the king's enemies. Elizabeth Woodville, still in sanctuary, received word of Collingbourne's account through a trusted messenger. The image of the sacks haunted her, conjuring visions of her son's lifeless bodies cast into the river. Yet a flicker of hope remained. What if the sacks held not bodies, but supplies for a journey to safety? The uncertainty was a torment, but it fueled her determination to uncover the truth. Collingbourne's tale spread beyond the court, reaching the ears of Henry Tudor's agents across the Channel. The Lancastrian exile, gathering support in Brittany, seized on the story as proof of Richard's guilt. His emissaries spread pamphlets accusing the king of murdering his nephews, their words designed to inflame rebellion. The pamphlets were crude but effective, painting Richard as a monster whose reign was cursed by the blood of innocents. The truth of Collingbourne's story mattered less than its impact. It was a weapon, sharpened to cut Richard's legitimacy to ribbons. The curse deepens. By October 1483, the mystery of the princes had become a cancer, eating away at Richard's reign. The court was a labyrinth of lies, where every noble was a suspect and every rumor a potential truth. The ghosts of the tower, whether real or imagined, seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, their presence a reminder of a crime that could not be erased. Richard's attempts to govern were overshadowed by the specter of his nephews, their absence a wound that bled into every decision he made. The king's enemies grew bolder. Buckingham, now openly plotting rebellion, sent messengers to Elizabeth Woodville, promising to restore her son's legacy. Henry Tudor, his forces swelling with exiles and mercenaries, prepared to invade, his cause bolstered by the mystery of the princes. In the shadows of London, lesser conspirators wove their own plans, each hoping to profit from the chaos. The Tower, once a symbol of royal might, had become a prison of secrets, its ghosts a testament to a kingdom on the brink. The stage was set for a reckoning, but the truth remained elusive. Had the princes been murdered, their bodies hidden beneath the tower stones? Or had they been spirited away, their survival a secret known only to a few? As the mists of autumn thickened, the answers seemed to slip further away, buried in a maze of fear and betrayal. The ghosts of the tower watched and waited, their silent cries a demand for justice that would echo through the centuries.
Chapter 4.
The Pretenders and the Hidden Truth. The winter of 1483 settled over England like a shroud, its icy grip tightening around a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse. The Tower of London, once a bastion of royal power, now stood as a monument to loss, its silent stones guarding the mystery of the missing princes, Edward V and Richard of York. King Richard III's reign, barely 6 months old, was unraveling under the weight of suspicion and rebellion. The disappearance of the 2 young boys had become a rallying cry for his enemies, a wound that bled into every corner of the realm. Yet, as the fires of dissent burned brighter, whispers of hope emerged, tales of survival, of secret escapes, and of pretenders who claimed to be the lost princes. These stories, woven with threads of truth and deception, ignited a new wave of intrigue, drawing the court deeper into a labyrinth of lies where the line between savior and impostor blurred, and the hidden truth remained just out of reach. The Spark of Hope. In the shadowed sanctuary of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth Woodville clung to fragments of hope like a drowning woman grasping at driftwood. The Queen Dowager, her beauty worn thin by grief, spent her days sifting through messages smuggled from the outside world. Each letter brought a new rumor, a new possibility that her sons might yet live. One such message, delivered by a cloaked figure in the dead of night, spoke of a boy seen in Flanders, his golden hair and regal bearing eerily reminiscent of Edward V. Another claimed that young Richard of York had been spirited to a remote monastery, guarded by monks loyal to the Yorkist cause. These tales, though thin and unproven, were enough to keep Elizabeth's resolve alive. She would not, could not, believe her sons were dead until she saw their bodies with her own eyes. The court, too, buzzed with whispers of survival. In the taverns and marketplaces of London, ballads sang of the prince's escape, their verses painting vivid pictures of midnight boats and secret passages. The common folk, weary of war and distrustful of their king, embraced these stories as a flicker of light in a darkening world. If the princes lived, they reasoned, there was hope for justice, for a restoration of the Yorkist line untainted by Richard's ambition. Yet these same stories were a double-edged sword, for they fueled rebellion, giving Richard's enemies a cause to rally behind. The most tantalizing rumor came from a merchant who claimed to have seen a boy resembling Richard of York in the household of a Yorkist exile in Burgundy. The boy, he said, was treated with reverence, his identity concealed, but his presence guarded by armed men. The merchant's tale spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of Richard's spies and Elizabeth's allies alike. For the Queen Dowager, it was a lifeline. For Richard, it was a threat. If even one prince lived, his claim to the throne was in jeopardy, his legitimacy a house of cards waiting to collapse. The king responded with a flurry of proclamations, denouncing the rumors as treason and ordering his agents to hunt down their source. But the stories persisted, each one a spark that threatened to ignite a rebellion.
The Rise of the Pretenders. As the winter deepened, the whispers of survival gave birth to a new phenomenon: pretenders who claimed to be the lost princes. The first to emerge was Lambert Simnel, a boy of 10 or 11 whose delicate features and vague resemblance to Edward V caught the attention of Yorkist exiles in Ireland. Simnel, the son of an Oxford tradesman, was an unlikely candidate for royalty, but his handlers saw opportunity in his malleability. They declared him to be Edward V, escaped from the Tower and ready to reclaim his throne. The claim was audacious, even absurd, yet it found fertile ground in a land weary of Richard's rule and hungry for a savior. Simnel's cause was championed by John de la Pole, Earl of Lincoln, a Yorkist noble with his own claim to the throne. Lincoln, disillusioned with Richard's reign,
saw in Simnel a chance to destabilize the king and advance his own ambitions. In Ireland, where Yorkist sympathies ran deep, Simnel was crowned Edward VI in a makeshift ceremony, his young voice reciting oaths he barely understood. The rebellion gained momentum, drawing support from Irish lords and disaffected English nobles. By the spring of 1487, Simnel's forces landed in England, their banners bearing the white rose of York. Richard met the rebellion with characteristic ruthlessness. His armies crushed Simnel's forces at the Battle of Stoke Field in June 1487, a bloody clash that marked the last major battle of the Wars of the Roses. Simnel was captured, his royal pretensions exposed as a fraud. In a rare act of mercy, Richard spared the boy's life, employing him as a scullion in the royal kitchens, a humiliating end for a would-be king. Yet the rebellion's failure did little to quell the rumors. If Simnel was a fraud, could another pretender be the real prince? The question lingered, a poison that seeped into the court's already fractured trust. Years later, a second pretender emerged, far more dangerous than the first. Perkin Warbeck, a young man from Flanders, declared himself to be Richard of York in 1491, claiming to have escaped the Tower and lived in hiding. Warbeck's story was compelling. He spoke with the polish of a prince, his manners refined, his knowledge of the Yorkist court uncanny. He claimed to have been smuggled out of England by loyalists, hidden in Burgundy under the protection of Margaret of York, the prince's aunt and a fierce enemy of the Tudors who had overthrown Richard by then. Warbeck's charm and conviction won him allies across Europe, from the courts of Burgundy to the kings of Scotland and France. Warbeck's rebellion was a slow-burning threat, stretching over years and drawing support from those who believed, or wanted to believe, that a prince had survived. His presence was a constant thorn in the side of Henry VIII, the Tudor king who had defeated Richard at Bosworth in 1485. Henry denounced Warbeck as an impostor, but his efforts to capture the pretender only fueled the mystery. Was Warbeck truly Richard of York, or was he a pawn in a larger game, manipulated by Yorkist exiles to destabilize the Tudor regime? The truth was elusive, and Warbeck's eventual capture and execution in 1499 did little to resolve it. His confession, extracted under duress, admitted to being a fraud, but doubts lingered, fed by those who saw in him the ghost of a lost prince. The court's descent into chaos. The emergence of pretenders like Simnel and Warbeck sent shockwaves through the court, deepening the paranoia that had taken root in Richard's reign. Every rumor of a surviving prince was a dagger aimed at the king's legitimacy, and Richard's response was to tighten his grip on power. He ordered his spies to infiltrate the households of suspected rebels, their reports painting a picture of a realm unraveling. One such report, delivered in a sealed parchment to the king's chamber, spoke of a secret meeting in the north where Yorkist loyalists plotted to proclaim a new pretender. The report named no one, but its implications were clear. The prince's legacy, whether real or fabricated, was a fire that could not be extinguished. The court became a battleground of whispers and accusations. The Duke of Buckingham, whose loyalty had wavered in the previous months, was now openly in rebellion, his forces gathering in the west. He sent messengers to Elizabeth Woodville, promising to restore her son's legacy, though whether he believed in their survival was unclear. Lord Stanley, ever the opportunist, maintained a delicate balance, his allegiance shifting with the winds of power. Even the clergy, once a bastion of royal support, began to waver, with figures like the Bishop of Ely preaching sermons that hinted at divine judgment on a king who had lost his nephews. Richard's attempts to quell the unrest were increasingly desperate. He issued proclamations denying the pretenders' claims, branding them as traitors and their supporters as enemies of the crown. Yet his words rang hollow, for he could offer no proof of the prince's fate. The king's silence, once a shield, had become a noose, tightening with each new rumor. In private, he raged against his enemies, his voice echoing through the halls of Westminster as he cursed the Woodvilles, the Tudors, and the ghosts that haunted his reign. But his anger could not mask the fear in his eyes, the fear of a man who knew his throne was built on sand.
Elizabeth's last hope. In the sanctuary of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth Woodville was a woman transformed by desperation. The tales of pretenders, though fraught with doubt, were a lifeline she could not ignore. She pored over every message, every rumor, searching for a shred of truth. One letter, smuggled from a Yorkist exile in Burgundy, spoke of a boy who knew details of the prince's life in the Tower, details only a true prince could know. The letter hinted at a secret network of loyalists stretching from London to the continent who had sworn to protect the boys. Elizabeth's heart raced as she read, her mind torn between hope and dread. Could one of her sons still live, hidden in plain sight? Or was this another cruel deception designed to break her spirit? Her allies, though few, were fierce in their determination. They spoke of a plan to send emissaries to Flanders to seek out the boy who might be Richard of York. The risk was immense, for Richard's spies were everywhere, and any move against the king could end in death. Yet Elizabeth was undeterred. She wrote letters in code, her words veiled but urgent, calling on her supporters to uncover the truth. One such letter, intercepted by Richard's agents, spoke of a rose yet blooming, a phrase that sent chills through the court. Was it a metaphor or a signal that a prince had survived? The ambiguity was a weapon, cutting both ways. A realm divided. By the spring of 1484, England was a powder keg, ready to ignite. The pretenders, whether frauds or not, had given voice to the kingdom's discontent, their claims a mirror reflecting the failures of Richard's reign. Across the Channel, Henry Tudor's forces grew stronger, his promises of justice and restoration drawing exiles and rebels to his banner. In London, the common folk whispered of the prince's ghosts, their songs and stories a quiet rebellion against a king who had lost their trust. The Tower, once a symbol of royal might, now stood as a testament to loss, its walls echoing with the silent cries of two boys whose fate remained unknown. The truth, if it existed, was buried deep in a web of deceit, its threads woven by kings, nobles, and pretenders alike. Had the princes been spirited away, their survival a secret guarded by loyalists? Or had they been silenced forever, their bodies hidden in the tower's shadows? As the winter gave way to spring, the answer seemed further away than ever, lost in a maze of hope and betrayal. The ghosts of the tower watched, their presence a reminder that the price of power was paid in blood, and the truth, if it could be found, would come at a cost no one could imagine.
Chapter 5. The Curse Endures. The spring of 1484 brought no relief to a kingdom suffocating under the weight of its own secrets. The Tower of London, its grey stones weathered by time and treachery, stood as a silent sentinel over a realm fractured by the mystery of the missing princes, Edward V and Richard of York. King Richard III's reign, now less than a year old, was crumbling, eroded by rebellion, suspicion, and the relentless specter of his nephew's fate. The pretenders who claimed to be the lost princes had ignited hope and chaos in equal measure, but their failures only deepened the enigma. As whispers of ghostly cries and hidden truths swirled through the court, a new possibility emerged, one that cast suspicion not only on Richard, but on those closest to the Yorkist line. The curse of the Tower, born of blood and betrayal, endured, its shadows stretching across centuries, demanding answers that remained maddeningly out of reach.
a new betrayal unveiled. As the mists of spring clung to London's streets, a chilling theory began to take root among the court's whispers. What if the prince's fate was not the work of Richard alone, but of those within the House of York itself? The idea was unthinkable, yet it gained traction in the shadowed corners of Westminster, where nobles and servants alike grappled with the mystery. The princes, after all, had been a threat not only to Richard, but to anyone with ambitions for the throne. Could a trusted ally, perhaps even a family member, have orchestrated their disappearance to clear a path for their own rise? The suspicion fell on figures like the Duke of Buckingham, whose rebellion in the autumn of 1483 had ended in failure and execution. Buckingham had been Richard's right hand, a man privy to the innermost workings of the court. Some whispered that he had seen the princes as obstacles to his own claim, a rival branch of the Yorkist line that could eclipse his ambitions. A letter, discovered among Buckingham's effects after his death, hinted at a darker truth. Written in a hurried hand, it spoke of a necessary sacrifice to secure the future of York. The letter was vague, its meaning obscured, but it fueled speculation that Buckingham had acted alone, or with Richard's tacit approval, to eliminate the boys. Another name surfaced in the whispers: Margaret of York, the prince's aunt and the powerful Duchess of Burgundy. Margaret, a staunch Yorkist, exiled in the Low Countries, had long opposed the Woodvilles and their influence. Her support for pretenders like Perkin Warbeck suggested a deep knowledge of the prince's fate, perhaps even complicity in their disappearance. Had she arranged for the boys to be spirited away, hidden in her domains to be used as pawns in a future rebellion? Or had she ensured their silence, seeing them as threats to the Yorkist cause she championed? The truth was elusive, but the possibility of betrayal within the family cut deeper than any external plot. These theories, though unproven, were a poison that seeped into the court. Richard, already beleaguered by rebellion, found himself facing accusations not only from his enemies, but from his own kin. The House of York, once a united front against the Lancasters, was fracturing from within, its members consumed by ambition and distrust. The prince's absence had become a mirror, reflecting the rot at the heart of the royal family, a rot that no crown could conceal.
The modern echoes. Centuries later, the mystery of the princes would resurface with startling clarity. In 2012, a discovery beneath a Leicester parking lot shook the historical world. The skeleton of Richard III, identified through meticulous DNA analysis. The find, buried beneath the ruins of a long-lost church, brought the king's life and legacy into sharp focus. His bones, marked by scoliosis and battle wounds, painted a picture of a man both flawed and formidable, a warrior king whose reputation had been shaped by his enemies. The discovery reignited debate about the princes, with scholars and enthusiasts alike revisiting the question of his guilt. The bones found in the tower in 1674, presumed to be those of the princes, remained a tantalizing clue. Examined in 1933, they were confirmed to belong to two children, roughly 9 and 12 years old, matching the ages of Edward V and Richard of York. Yet the royal family, citing respect for the dead, refused further testing, leaving their identity unconfirmed. Modern science could unlock the truth. DNA analysis might prove whether the bones were those of the princes and perhaps even point to their killer, but the opportunity remained out of reach, a decision that frustrated historians and fueled speculation. The lack of closure only deepened the curse's hold. Scholars like Alison Weir argued for Richard's guilt, pointing to his motive and opportunity. Others, like Philippa Langley of the Richard III Society, championed his innocence, suggesting that the Tudors, who defeated Richard at Bosworth in 1485, had orchestrated a campaign to vilify him. The truth, they argued, might lie with Henry VII, whose own claim to the throne was fragile, and whose silence on the prince's fate was suspiciously absolute. The debate raged on, each side wielding fragments of evidence like weapons in a war of words, while the prince's fate remained a void at the heart of history. A king's final days. In 1484, Richard III stood on the precipice of ruin. The pretenders had failed, but their rebellions had exposed the fragility of his reign. Henry Tudor, now a growing threat, gathered forces in Brittany, his cause bolstered by the mystery of the princes. The Tudor propaganda machine, already in motion, painted Richard as a monster, a child killer whose throne was cursed by divine wrath. The king's attempt to counter these claims were futile. His proclamations of innocence rang hollow without proof, and his refusal to produce the princes, dead or alive, only deepened the suspicion. Richard's inner circle was shrinking. The execution of Buckingham had silenced one threat, but others emerged in its place. Lord Stanley, whose loyalty was a constant question, maintained a careful distance, his eyes fixed on the rising star of Henry Tudor. Elizabeth Woodville, though still in sanctuary, wielded influence through her network of allies. Her grief transformed into a quiet, relentless campaign for justice. The court, once a place of power, was now a battlefield of whispers, where every word was a potential betrayal. In his private moments, Richard was a man haunted. The weight of the crown, once a symbol of triumph, now pressed down like a millstone. He dreamed of the princes, their faces pale and accusing, their voices echoing through the corridors of his mind. Had he ordered their deaths, as his enemies claimed, or had he been betrayed by those he trusted, left to bear the blame for a crime he did not commit? The truth was a shadow, slipping through his fingers, and the king knew that his reign, and perhaps his life, depended on silencing the ghosts that haunted him.
The Tower's last whisper. The Tower of London, its walls weathered by time, stood as the enduring symbol of the prince's tragedy. Its stones, stained by centuries of blood and tears, seemed to hold the answers that history could not provide. In the spring of 1484, a final rumor emerged, carried by a monk who claimed to have served in the tower during the prince's confinement. The monk, his voice trembling with fear, spoke of a night when he had seen two small figures led from the garden tower under guard, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They were taken to a boat on the Thames, he said, and vanished into the darkness. The monk's tale was dismissed as fantasy, but it lingered in the minds of those who heard it, a faint hope that the princes had escaped, or a grim confirmation that they had been taken to their doom. The monk's story reached Elizabeth Woodville, her last fragile thread of hope. She clung to it, even as her heart warned her of its futility. The possibility that her sons lived, hidden in some distant land, was a torment as great as the certainty of their death. She sent emissaries to search for them, their missions cloaked in secrecy, but they returned with nothing but rumors and shadows. The truth, if it existed, was buried too deep, guarded by those who had paid for power with the blood of innocence. A legacy of sorrow. The mystery of the princes became more than a question of their fate. It was a reflection of a kingdom's soul. The Wars of the Roses, fought over the right to rule, had left England scarred, its people weary of bloodshed and betrayal. Richard III, whether villain or victim, was a product of that world, a man shaped by the violence and ambition that defined his age. His reign, brief and turbulent, ended at Bosworth Field in August 1585, when Henry Tudor's forces cut him down, claiming the throne as Henry VII. The Tudors, eager to legitimize their rule, painted Richard as a monster, their chroniclers weaving a narrative of guilt that would endure for centuries. But the truth remained elusive. Had Richard ordered the princes' deaths, securing his throne at the cost of his soul? Had Buckingham or another Yorkist betrayed their own kin, sacrificing the boys for their own ambitions? Or had Henry VII, the victor of Bosworth, silenced the princes to eliminate a threat to his fragile dynasty?
The bones in the tower, the rumors of escape, the tales of pretenders, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. The curse of the tower endured, its shadow stretching across time, a reminder that power was a fleeting prize, paid for in blood and lies. In the end, the ghosts of the princes stood watch over the tower, their silent presence a demand for justice that history could not fulfill. Their story was a tragedy, a warning, and a mystery that would haunt England forever. As the spring of 1484 gave way to summer, the kingdom braced for the storm to come, knowing that the truth, if it could be found, would come at a price no one could bear.